This summer, I have decided that buildings are a necessary evil. I think it's probably because of all the house projects I've had to do, and it just seems like there's always one hanging over my head this summer. And, they're necessary. My children like a place to lay their head, I know. But it seems like there's a project you got to spend money on. There's always something you got to do. And that you kind of lose your mobility a little bit. And I think I find it true of our church too. Not our church as a people. Our buildings sometimes I feel like are a necessary evil. We got to have them, and don't get me wrong, it's great to have programs, to have your own buildings for programs and things like that. You can't have a school without a building; it'd be quite difficult. But I always think about how sometimes it feels like we lose our mobility, and sometimes it becomes where our church becomes almost in our minds, it's subconscious that it becomes about what we do in this location. When you have a building, it almost seems like ministry becomes about what you do here, in that building. And I think that's a really dangerous place for us to communicate. But it's hard not to. And that's why I think buildings are a necessary evil. It's hard not to communicate that. If somebody asks you, where do you go to church? You'll say Bethel Baptist Church, and they'll say, where's that? And you'll say, 1781 West 38th Street. Or now that you know the address, you'll say 1781 West 38th Street. Of course, you'll say that, but in reality, that's not where the church is. I'd really wish we could start thinking of ourselves more like a sports team. Not because I'd like us all to have jerseys, but think about it. Think about the Steelers. When you think about the Steelers, do you think about their arena or do you think about the team? I think you think about the team. Sure, they have an arena, but the Steelers, it's about the team. It's about what they do on the field. And at least half of what they do is not in their arena, but is someplace else. They go someplace else. But it's not about the location. The Steelers are not about a location. They're about who they are as a team. And, of course, in Erie, it's all about how good they are and how wonderful. Unless you're Pastor Tim. All right. So, anyways, I kind of wish that instead of on our sign that says Bethel Baptist Church here, I wish it said like home of the Bethel Baptists, or home of the Bethel Baptist Crushers, so I propose a name change, but no, I don't. No, we can't do that. But we can know our name a little bit better, because there's something actually, it might sound strange, but there's something special about the word Bethel. And it actually signifies a lot about what a church is really supposed to be. But the difficult thing is nobody knows what Bethel means. Or maybe, some of you do. Raise your hands if you know, don't shout it out now, but raise your hands if you know what the word Bethel means. Okay, all right. Many of you do. Especially if you've been in this church a long time. The longer you've been in this church, the more likely it is that you know what that name means. But it's a very special name. It comes from Genesis chapter 28. And there what was happening was Jacob, who was eventually named Israel, he had just left his dad Isaac, and he was pretty much fleeing because he had stolen his brother's special blessings called a birthright. And so while he's fleeing, he falls asleep with a rock as his pillow. And he has this dream, and he sees a ladder going up from earth to heaven. And there's angels going up and down that ladder. And then the Lord stands above that ladder and says, I am the Lord God of Abraham and Isaac. And God at that moment tells him, tells Jacob, he says, he says, I'm going to make a great nation of you. And as you know, later he changes his name to Israel, and he really did make a great nation of him. So after that dream, Jacob wakes up, and he says this, and I just want to read to you Genesis chapter 28, and I want to read these verses to you. He says, and he was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Then Jacob rose early in the morning and took the stone that he had put at his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. And so he says, this place is the house of God, and then he named the place Bethel. That's because in Hebrew, Beth means house, and El is short for Elohim, which is a word for God. So Bethel means house of God, or dwelling place of God, or God's house. And so that's why I like our name. Our name means God's house. We are God's House Bethel Church, or Baptist Church, not Bethel. That's repetitive. We are God's House Baptist Church. Doesn't really flow off the tongue as well, but I really like it. And I especially like it too because when we get to the New Testament with Christ coming and what he did on the cross, God's house takes on a whole even greater meaning. You see, in the Old Testament, God's house eventually really, it became God's dwelling place, became about a place where God actually dwelled. And as you know, he told the Israelites to build a tabernacle, which later in Jerusalem became a temple. And in that place had the Holy of Holies, and that's where God dwelled. And unfortunately, though, as God was displeased with Israel, that the glory of God departed from that place, from the Holy of Holies. The glory of God is no longer in the Holy of Holies, and the temple's gone now. But Ezekiel told us about that in chapter 10, that the glory of God departed. But then, as you know, Christ did an amazing work on the cross. And now we can say God has returned. But you're not going to find him in that temple. And this is what I like. This is what the New Testament does. And gives us great meaning, I think, as a church to what God's house means and why it's such a special word in our name. Ephesians 2:19 through 22 says this. He says, Now therefore you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of the house of God. You are no longer strangers. You are members of the house of God. It says, having been built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, Jesus Christ himself being the chief cornerstone, in whom the whole building being fitted together grows into a holy temple in the Lord, in whom you also are being built together for a dwelling place of God in the Spirit. So it says you are being fitted together. You are being built together to be a dwelling place of God. You are the temple. Not a building is a temple. A building, we have dedicated this building to the service of God, but this building is not the house of God. You are the house of God. And I like the imagery here. He says, Christ is our cornerstone. And so let this represent Christ as our cornerstone, the stone in which all other stones are connected. And without that stone, the whole building would fall down. But with Christ as the cornerstone, the imagery is that there's other stones. And those stones are not like that. There we go. Huh. Huh. Whoa. No. There. There we go. Okay. It's not the right one? I lost it somehow, huh? Okay. Now I can't steal that then. One more time. All right. So we'll do it this way then. All right. So Jesus is the cornerstone. And then it says the whole building being fitted together. So the imagery is not really, probably not best of bricks, but it's probably more of stones, because it says the whole building is being fitted together. And the imagery of stones is that no two stones are alike. So the master builder has to figure out how they fit all together as a puzzle. And that's the church. And what's supposed to happen is that we're supposed to see one brick being added one at a time. Like that. There we go. Yeah. And so it's one at a time being fit together until it says, in whom the whole building being fitted together grows. And it's going to grow, and it's going to create the holy temple in the Lord, in whom also are being built together for a dwelling place of God. So it grows, fit together. Jesus is the cornerstone until we have the dwelling place of God. And I like this imagery. I like this picture because it's you and I, the church, that God is putting together like that and fitting together. And what you see there, that symbol right there, I'm excited to tell you, is going to be a key symbol in our new logo for the church. And what you see there is not a church building. You don't see a steeple on top of that. What that is God's house. You and I, having been fit together, you and I, one of those circles, and Jesus being our cornerstone. And so it'll take some explaining, and we'll do it here and there at different times. But when you see the church logo, Bethel Baptist Church, you're going to see God's house. Each one of us having been fit together. Bethel Baptist Church. And so I'm really, really excited about that. And we're going to think, if you are one of those stones, what does that mean? And how are you going to be connected to what we're doing here if you are one of those stones? So let's turn our hearts again and just ask God's leading in our own hearts that we might become those stones that He desires. And we're going to just do that as we sing.
To me for just a moment, I'm probably going to tell you something here at the beginning that you already know. And I want to just ask you and challenge you, don't tune it out just because you already know it, because it's the background that's so very, very important. But Genesis chapter 1 through Genesis chapter 3 paints a very hopeful yet very frustrating picture for us. God created everything good. There's so much hope there. He created everything good. But Satan and sin, they stole that goodness. He stole that goodness from both creation and man. And so he created everything good, but sin stole that goodness and completely blanked it out in darkness. And Genesis 3 then gives us some more hope. That's the frustrating part. But Genesis 3 gives us more hope, declaring that, and if you allow me to paraphrase Genesis chapter 3, that one day Christ would come to end the enmity between God and man. He would reconcile what was broken and marred. He would take that darkness into himself so that goodness could come out again. It's in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, and if you have your Bible, you can go ahead and turn there because we want to look at that for just a couple minutes here. 2 Corinthians chapter 5. That's what we see there in just slightly different words. I'm going to read from verse 18 here to start. 2 Corinthians 5, verse 18 says this, "All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation." Who through Christ reconciled us to himself. He took that darkness, that frustrating, we're sinners and we have no hope. He took that on himself. He took that darkness on himself and gave us the hope of reconciliation. He reconciled us to himself. That was Christ's job, to provide a way of reconciliation, and he did that through his death on the cross. He ended sin's hold over us because of his death, because of death. Sin has this way of causing us to be afraid of death. And Christ gives us hope and ends that fear that is caused by death and said, "No, I died so you don't have to." He showed us that death is nothing to be feared if we are in a relationship with Jesus, the Christ, God in human form. If we have a relationship with him, death is nothing to be feared. But at the beginning of the book of Acts, Christ left the earth. He was the one we were to have relationship. He was the one that cast out fear. But in the beginning of Acts, Christ left the earth, which gives hope, lots of it. But what about the rest of the world? What about the ones that didn't meet Christ? What about those people who didn't have that chance for a relationship with him, a physical relationship with him? How will they hear about reconciliation? How will they hear about the gospel? How will they hear without Christ? That's the question that the beginning of Acts demands of us. Christ left the earth. And Paul answers that question at the end of verse 18 in 2 Corinthians chapter 5. And then into 19 and 20. Says that he gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them. We talked about that. But entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. So we implore you on the behalf of Christ, be reconciled to God. So we become God's ambassadors of reconciliation. It's our ministry now. For the sake of the gospel and for the sake of the world, it's our ministry. We are the reconciliation now. That "we" is so important because the tool, the medium through which reconciliation is shared with the world outside these doors is not just the individual, it's the church. That "we" is so important. The church is the means through which God shows reconciliation to the world, through which God shows the gospel to the world. The church is entrusted with that ministry, which is great because I probably give a pretty incomplete picture of what reconciliation looks like in my life. I might be able to teach about it, but looking at me, you might miss the mercy that's also part of reconciliation, because I have a little difficulty being sympathetic sometimes. You might miss the graciousness that's part of reconciling with God in the gospel when you look at just me. Or when you look at just you, you might miss some other aspect of the gospel that when you look at Christ, he was all of it. He was everything because he was perfect. But the church is that full, complete representation of who Christ was, of what the gospel really is and really can do. The church, not just the individual. Because as an individual, we give a pretty incomplete picture. The church was designed to give that complete picture through the contribution of each of its members. Romans chapter 12, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, Ephesians chapter 4, they all remind us that we each have a specific role to play. We each have a specific gift, a specific job, a specific reason that we were chosen. And even tonight, we've been reminded that we are each a part, we are each a stone of this house that creates a solid structure that broadcasts one singular message: God reconciles. And the stronger we build, the stronger that message gets. But that requires the individual to see how important their role is, whether they are doing it or not. So here's what I mean. In this house, we've broken down roles. that maybe will help us easily present God's message of reconciliation to those who need to hear it most, those who we can touch, those who we can reach out to and grab a hold of. See, what I mean is, nope, that's not what I mean. What I mean is, don't do anything, Nate. Wait for it. Don't do it. There we go. What I mean is, we need mercy. Where is it? There it is. We need mercy. We need people with the gift of mercy, people who have a sympathetic heart, people who have an understanding heart, people who can show compassion when others can't. It's part of God's house. We need other people. Can you go to the next one, Nate? Just click on the screen on your right. We need people with the gift of helps. People who have that gift of just coming alongside and saying, you need help, I can help you, I'll do whatever you want. I'll pick this up, I'll move this there, I'll give you a ride, here's some money, whatever you need. We need people with those gifts. Go to the next one, Nate. Look at these. We need people with the gift of truth who know this is the truth of the gospel. You're struggling, I can say it and you speak it into your life. People with the gift of peace who can come alongside and counsel and show people how to reconcile. People with the gift of hospitality. Welcome to my home. Here, welcome to our church. We're so glad you're here. Can I help you with anything? People with the gift of teaching. People with the gift of faith who can pray and pray with faith and know that God will do it. There are so many gifts. If you look at those chapters, there are so many gifts that we need. Maybe this is a little bit too abstract for you, though. Can you go to the next one, Nate? Maybe this is a little too abstract. So here's what I need. Here's what I mean, and here's what we need. We need people who know how to clean. You've got the gift of help. You know how to clean. It's not hard. That's something you can do to help this house, help this church broadcast the gift of reconciliation. It's the full picture. Go to the next one, Nate. We need people who can teach. We need people who can greet. Hospitality. Welcome, we're so glad you're here. That sweet, sweet smile that everybody tells you have. We need it at the front door. Those people who can speak the truth of the gospel, we need to hear that from our Sunday school classes, from our nursery, on Sunday mornings, wherever it might be, in life groups, wherever it might be, we need to hear that truth. Go to the next one, Nate. We need people who can counsel. We need people who can cook, right? We need people who can handle tech jobs. None of this is difficult, but all of these are the manifestation of the gift that God has given you. He's given you some gift, and sometimes it's so abstract you think, what in the world does mercy mean? Mercy means you come alongside people and you counsel them, and you help them, and you get involved in their life, and maybe that's through life group, but maybe it's through some sort of program or step that the church provides for you and says, we need your help. Get involved. What's the next one, Nate? Picking up chairs. That's not hard. But it shows a really complete picture of what the gospel can do, because when you have people saying, I will help do whatever you need to do. Preaching. It's not always just limited to the pastors, although that's what we do. But some people do have the gift of communicating the word, and they might not have gone to Bible school for it. Doesn't mean you have to be on this stage to do it. There are other opportunities, believe it or not, in a church where you can share the word of God. Next one's Nate. Working in the nursery, helping with the others. Go to the last one, Nate. We need those sound techs, those musicians, those ushers, those custodians, those pastors, those teachers. What we really need is each stone to do its part. They are what builds a house that represents reconciliation. Those things, those people all working together towards one purpose. That's how we represent the gospel as a church. But when stones, and so my question is, where do you fit? Where do you fit? Why is that question mark there? Because I'm pretty sure we have an incomplete picture of what the house looks like, because not every stone does its part. This is what it looks like when every stone does a part. Go to the next one, Nate. When every stone doesn't do its part, it's an incomplete picture. Keep going. It's an incomplete picture, and then what happens is some stones have to do more. That doesn't look like a house. You may be able to see a little bit of it, but when one stone doesn't do its part, the other stones pick up the load and do more than they need to. Makes other stones do more work. We need everyone doing its part, everyone playing its role. Go to the next slide, Nate. And Pastor Dave is going to share then and challenge us with each stone doing its role.
Which stone are you? And I'm sure for many of you, you're already thinking with the different names on the stones, yeah, that's me. That's what I do. And some of you might be thinking, I'm not really sure what, or I'd like to do more. I want you to take your little circle now. And I want you to take your pen. And I want you to write down what you do. Maybe as it said, usher, maybe you're an usher. Maybe what you do wasn't even on the screen. That's okay. What is your involvement? What is your ministry here at Bethel? Go ahead, write it down. And some of you are thinking, there's no room on the tiny circle but that's okay. Just do your best. Write tiny. But write it down. You might have more than one, and that's all right. Write it down. Okay. Are you having trouble writing it down? That's okay. If you're not sure what yours is, like that one right there, put a question mark. Put a question mark on it. I want us to celebrate, and I want to say thank you. This church has existed for a long time because people have known what place they are as stones. But sometimes, if you've been doing things for years and years and years, you start to forget why you started it in the first place, kind of like the hamster wheel, And tonight, I want to remind us why we do what we do. Tim, would you bring that over there, please? Just bring it over here a little bit. We want to tonight remind ourselves and connect everything to the gospel. Connect everything to the ministry of reconciliation. The nursery worker, though she's probably not sharing Christ with the tiny little babies, she is doing that parents might hear the gospel and grow. The ushers are helping people find their place, doing all the little things that need to be done, the bulletins and all those little things, and make sure everything's situated so that people won't be distracted, so that they will hear the gospel and hear the ministry of reconciliation. Everything, those who put out the chairs so that people are comfortable when they're sitting, so that they won't be distracted. It's all connected to the gospel. It's all connected to our cornerstone. And I want to do this tonight. I want you to reconnect to your mind, in your mind, what you do to the ministry of reconciliation. And of course, we need those who are sharing Christ outside. There's so many ways. We need people giving. It's all connected to the gospel. But I want us to reconnect and make a commitment before the Lord and tell Him today, as a church, we do what we do for the ministry of reconciliation. In other words, we do what we do that more people might know Christ and serve God. So I'm inviting you in a moment to take your circle, and we're going to sing Just As I Am. And I want you to take your circle, and I want you to come. If you're willing to say, what I do is for the sake of the gospel, what I do is for more people to know Christ and serve God. If that's your heart, what I do is for more people to know Christ and serve God, I want you to add it to the house. What about you with the question mark? I want to be part of more people knowing Christ and serving God, but my circle's got a question mark. I want you, as a testimony also, I want to be part of what Bethel's doing that more people might know and serve God. I just don't know what my place is. You come with that question mark. Don't be embarrassed by it. Come with that question mark on yours and your name on it and put it here. And what that's going to do is tell us your willingness. Maybe you're doing other things, but you think, I think there's something else. Maybe you've got something in mind. That's okay. But with your question mark, put it on the house. And by doing that, we're going to be able to take those and know who really wants to, but is not sure what to do. And we'll contact you. If you put a question mark on your circle, we will contact you to help you find your place, and we'll help you find what your ministry, what you do for the ministry of reconciliation. We will connect you to it. So I want every person to do this. If you're not able to walk up here, take your circle and give it to the person that's next to you that can walk up here. But don't everybody designate one person in your row. Don't do that. All right? Because I want the imagery. When's the last time you came forward for an invitation? I want the imagery of our church reconnecting everything we do to the ministry of reconciliation. I want the picture of that by all of us coming forward and putting our circles on God's house. I want our children that are in this room to see this church saying what we do is for the ministry of reconciliation. Our children seeing us come forward. So just one by one, you can come and put your circle on our house.